The letter was bold, stamped in red, and taped right to David's front gate. Notice of violation, $250,000 fine. He froze, reading the words over and over, certain he must be imagining them. His cabin sat on land he had inherited from his grandfather, a peaceful retreat overlooking a quiet valley. And yet, here was the HOA, a group he had never even signed up for, demanding nearly $250,000. David couldn't believe it. The claims were absurd: illegal dock structure, non-compliant fencing, unapproved paint color. None of it made sense. His dock was built decades ago, his fence matched every other fence in the area, and as for paint color, the cabin had always been the same warm cedar brown. But what really caught his eye was the threat at the bottom: failure to comply may result in foreclosure proceedings. David's pulse raced. Foreclosure? On his land, he stuffed the letter into his pocket, determination growing. Something didn't add up. Why would a homeowners association he never joined suddenly slap him with such an outrageous fine? He knew one thing: this wasn't just about rules or paint. There was a bigger game being played. And David promised himself he'd uncover it, no matter how deep he had to dig, and that was only the beginning. What David discovered next would turn the entire neighborhood upside down. David decided to confront the HOA directly. He walked into their office, a sleek building at the edge of town, and was greeted by cold stares. At the center sat Karen Delaney, the HOA president, a woman with silver hair pulled into a tight bun, her smile thin as paper. "So," she said, tapping the fine notice with perfectly polished nails, "you've finally come to discuss your violations." David stayed calm. "This notice is a mistake. I never agreed to HOA rules. This is my grandfather's land. We've never been under your authority." Karen leaned forward, her voice dripping with condescension. "Everyone here answers to the association. And if you don't pay, you'll lose the property. Simple as that." Her confidence was unsettling. She spoke as though the land already belonged to her. But David noticed something strange: a map framed on her wall, showing the entire neighborhood, highlighted in sections. His land, the largest parcel, was outlined in red ink. Karen followed his gaze. "That's right," she said smugly. "We've had our eye on your property for years." David left that meeting with more questions than answers. Why was the HOA so fixated on his land? And why did that red outline feel less like a mark of violation and more like a target? He didn't know it yet, but the map was the key to everything, and it held a secret the HOA never wanted him to find. David turned to the only person who might know more: his grandfather's old lawyer, Mr. Whitman. The man was in his 80s now, frail but sharp. When David explained the situation, Whitman chuckled softly. "They really don't know, do they?" he muttered. Pulling out dusty files from an old cabinet, he handed David a thick deed. "Your grandfather didn't just own that cabin. He owned all the land beneath the neighborhood. Every road, every lot, every strip of property rests on his estate." David blinked in shock. "Wait, you're saying I own them?" Whitman nodded. "Exactly. The HOA can't fine you for violations on your own land. In fact, legally, they've been trespassing for years. Their entire neighborhood sits on your property. You hold the master deed." David's hands trembled as he flipped through the paperwork. The signatures, the seals, it was all there. His grandfather had been clever, buying up the land decades before selling off parcels with leases, not deeds. The houses belonged to the homeowners, but the ground beneath? That was still his family's. The HOA had no authority over him. In fact, if he wanted, David could dissolve their entire operation with one filing. But if that was true, why were they pushing so hard? Why risk everything to force him out? The answer lay buried in their obsession, and David was about to uncover it in the most dramatic way possible. Karen wasn't backing down. The HOA called a formal hearing, inviting residents to witness what they promised would be David's exposure. Flyers went out across the neighborhood, painting him as a rule breaker, a troublemaker, even a threat to community values. On the day of the hearing, the hall was packed. Karen stood at the podium, speaking with fiery authority. "This man thinks he's above the rules. He's ignored fines, disrespected our authority, and endangered property values. We demand foreclosure. Whispers spread through the crowd. Some residents glared at David, others looked uncertain. When it was his turn, David walked to the front with a calm confidence. He laid the master deed on the table. The thick document echoing as it hit the wood. Everything you've been told, he said, voice steady, is a lie. This neighborhood doesn't rest on HOA land. It rests on mine. Every street, every fence, every yard, all of it sits on property I inherited. The only authority here is me. Gasps filled the room. Karen's face drained of color. She tried to speak, but her words tangled. David lifted the deed high for everyone to see, and in that moment, the crowd realized the truth: the HOA wasn't in control. David was. The fallout was immediate. Neighbors who had blindly followed Karen began questioning everything. Some whispered angrily in the corners, realizing their HOA dues had funded years of false authority. Others rushed to David, asking if their homes were safe. One man spoke up, "Does this mean we've been paying them illegally?" David nodded. "Your homes are yours. But the land beneath belongs to me. And the HOA? They've been overstepping for years." Karen tried desperately to regain control. "Don't listen to him. This is just a technicality. We run this community." But the residents weren't convinced anymore. They saw the documents. They saw her fear. That night, messages flooded David's inbox. Some begged him to shut down the HOA, others asked for guidance. For the first time, the people weren't united behind Karen, they were looking to him, but with that power came a heavy choice. Should he forgive the years of false fines and intimidation? Or use the deed to take back everything? David knew the next step would decide the future of the entire neighborhood. David filed his claim at the county courthouse the next morning. The master deed was entered into record, and with a single legal motion, the HOA's authority crumbled. Their fines became meaningless, their threats void. Karen stormed into his cabin later that week, furious. "You can't do this. You'll destroy everything we built." David stood firm. "You destroyed it yourself when you tried to steal what wasn't yours. This neighborhood doesn't need your rules. It needs honesty." Her face hardened, but she had no power left. The law was on David's side. Within days, the HOA office was shuttered, their signs removed. The $250,000 fine notice that had once hung on his gate was now nothing more than scrap paper. And yet, David didn't seek revenge. Instead, he gathered the residents and offered them a choice: continue paying dues to a false authority, or come together as a community built on trust, not fear. The choice was obvious. The HOA was gone, but Karen wasn't finished yet. And her final act would surprise them all. Weeks later, David received a letter, not from the HOA, but from Karen herself. It wasn't a threat, not even an argument. It was an apology. She admitted she had known the truth about his deed for years but believed no one would ever challenge her. "I wanted control," she wrote. "But you reminded me that land isn't just property, it's legacy." David read the words in silence. He hadn't expected remorse, but perhaps this was the final closure the neighborhood needed. The residents thrived without the HOA's grip. Neighbors worked together, families rebuilt trust, and the lakefront finally felt free. David's grandfather's vision of a community bound not by rules, but by respect, had come alive again. Standing on his dock one evening, the sunset reflecting on the calm water, David felt a peace he hadn't known in years. The fight was over. The land was safe. And the future belonged to the people who lived there, not to an HOA, and that was the final twist in this unbelievable HOA story. If you loved the drama, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment sharing your thoughts. It really helps this channel grow.